أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي أنزل الفرقان على عبده ليكون للعالمين نذيرا وداعيا إلى الله بإذنه وسراجا منيرا والصلاة على من أذهب عنهم الرجس أهل البيت وطهرهم تطهيرا
اللهم صل على محمد
قال الله تعالى في القرآن الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنما ذلكم الشيطان يخوف أولياءه فلا تخافوه وخافوني. Respected brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The human being has four powers which comprise him as a human being. The power of anger, the power of desire, the power of intellect, and the power of imagination. These are four powers which have been instilled within the human being and have been given a neutral nature, in the idea that none of these powers are completely good and none of them are completely evil. Depending on how the human being depends and uses these faculties which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him, they will be sources which are agents of good, or on the flip side of the spectrum, agents which are sources of evil. And that's why you'll see throughout history, just as these powers served as forms of construction, there are also forms of destruction as well. For example, if it was anger that caused Adolf Hitler to kill 46 million people, the killings of the Holocaust and also World War II, a war which was directly caused by the hands of Adolf Hitler, then it was also anger which led Ali ibn Abi Talib to bring victory to Islam when he defeated Amr ibn Udd al-Amri. If it was desire that led to the contamination and destruction of the society of Lut, a society which was completely, as one would say, contaminated with homosexuality and desire, then it was also the faculty of desire that allowed Ali ibn Abi Talib and Fatima to Zahra to bring birth to 11 infallibles from their blessed loins. If it was imagination that led to the brilliant discoveries that we have in the world today, the discoveries of Sir Isaac Newton, the discoveries of Albert Einstein, gravity and relativity, and also which led to companions of Ahlul Bayt, such as Jabir bin Hayyan, who's seen as the father of chemistry, and also after him, Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, who through his imagination, he was able to come and bring a number of brilliant discoveries in the world. Then it was also imagination which led people like Jeffrey Dahmer to become curious to what would happen if I separate limbs from frogs, from monkeys, which ultimately led him to remove limbs from human beings. That's why even when they did an interview with the father, Jeffrey Dahmer, they told him, what's wrong, or with the father, they told him, what's wrong with your son? He said ever since his childhood, he was interested in the noise that the bones of frogs would make when they would clash with one another. Imagination. If it was intellect that also led to the discoveries of the world, then it was also intellect that allowed Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan to be the mischievous man that he was, which ultimately led to the death of Al-Hasan ibn Ali and Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam. Therefore you'll see, just as these four faculties served as sources of good, they were also sources of evil. Just as they were means for liberation, they were also means to a human being's limitation. One of the limitations that these four powers could bring to birth, precisely the faculty of imagination, is the limitation of fear. Now, of course, fear has a materialistic understanding and a spiritual understanding as well. Within the world of material, and the concept of fear that we have of in the world today, psychologically speaking, there is legitimate fears and there are irrational fears. Legitimate fears, for example, the fear of fire. A normal human being must fear fire. If he doesn't, it will harm him. The fear of pain, for example. The fear of, as one would say, diseases or poison. These are seen as legitimate fears. Yeah, then you have illegitimate fears. For example, you have that which is known as ablutophobia, which is the fear of showers, for example. You have dendrophobia, which is the fear of trees. And then you have homilophobia, which is the fear of lectures, which I hope none of you have. So you'll see there's a number of irrational fears. Fears which have no basis to them. It's simply because fear in essence, what is it translated as? It's that which the human being perceives as a threat, and because of that his body reacts to it. He may run away or hide. It's a perceived threat. The threat in essence may not exist, yet the imagination tends to create images within the mind which bring to birth that feeling of fear within the human being. This is within the material world. If within the physical world fear is seen as an appalling limitation, then within the spiritual world, fear is seen as a great liberation. You see, many times in our communities, when we speak about fear of Allah, we typically depict the idea and we correlate with fear of Allah punishment of the grave, adab al-qabr, for example, hellfire, poison, hamiman wa ghassaqa. We depict a very angry picture of God when we speak about fear. Whereas in essence, the primary relationship between man and God is fear. See, the problem when we depict fear as that of anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the problem is that we're mixing between fear of God and fear of man. Fear of man could lead to the human being's humility, for example. Fear of God is love, whereas fear of man is seen as horror and hate. Fear of God is inner satisfaction, whereas fear of man is depression. Fear of man leads you to run away from him, but a fear of God leads you to run to him. Look at the words of Imam Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam. He says when a human being fears man, he runs away from him. But when you fear God, you run to him. Meaning, when it comes to Allah, there is a chemical exchange, istihala, istibdal. Fear becomes love, it's no longer fear. That's why when we recite dua al-iftitah, we say, يَسْتَبْدِلْ مِنْ بَعْدِ خَوْفِهِ أَمْنَا يُعْبِدُكَ وَلَا يُشْرِكُ بِكَ شَيْئًا. We say it's changed, it's no longer fear. يَسْتَبْدِلْ مِنْ بَعْدِ خَوْفِهِ أَمْنَا. Fear becomes safety. Fear of God is seen as safety, whereas fear of man is insecurity. Fear of man makes you afraid of everything, whereas fear of God makes everything afraid of you. Imam Ali alayhi salam comes and he says, "Man khafa min Allah, khafa minhu kullu shay." He says, he who fears Allah, he's what? Everything begins to fear him. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَخَفْ مِنَ اللَّهِ هُوَ خَافَ مِنْ كُلُّ شَيْءٍ. And he who doesn't fear Allah, he is scared of everything. When I come and I say fear of God is strength, and fear of man and weakness, what does this mean? This means when I fear Allah, in essence, this doesn't give me weakness, this gives me strength. Meaning, the more afraid I am of Allah, the more strong I become as a human being. Because I broke myself to Allah, therefore nobody can come and break me again. That's why when you see Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam, he was afraid of Allah, no doubt. He would cry in the night like a slave. But it was the slave that Ali was in the night that made him the lion he was in the day.
حيدري يا علي نادي الصلوات.
It was the slave that Ali was in the time of the night that made Ali ibn Abi Talib the lion he was in the day. That's why when the poet comes and he describes for us Amir al-Mu'mineen, he describes him speaking about himself, saying, أَنَا الضَّحَّاكُ. He says, أَنَا الْبَكَّاءُ فِي الْمِحْرَابِ لَيْلًا. I am the one who cries in the mihrab in the day. In the night, وَأَنَا الضَّحَّاكُ إِذْ عَزَّ الضِّرَابُ. He says, I am the one who laughs when it comes time for the battlefield. That's why when you look at Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, they feared Allah, but this fear didn't give them weakness. It was a sign of strength, to the extent that even Amir al-Mu'mineen, when Rasulullah would come to the companions of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, he would tell them, مَلْ لِعَمْرٍ وَأَضْمِنْ لَهُ الْجَنَّةِ. Who is there for Amr? And I would give you Jannah. Amr bin Wudd al-Amri in the battle. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he would come to the people. He would tell them, who's willing to fight Amr? Amr would be standing there walking around. They say Amr was so tall, his feet would dangle on the ground while he would be riding his horse. Everybody feared Amr. Amr would be walking around, passing in front of the companions of the Holy Prophet of Islam. He would tell them, why do you fear to fight me? If it's a win-win situation, if you beat me, then you're victorious in the eyes of Muhammad. If you lose, then you go to Jannah. Why are you so scared? Rasulullah would come to people. He would tell them, مَنْ لِعَمْرٍ وَأَضْمِنْ لَهُ الْجَنَّةِ. Who's there for Amr and I give him Jannah? Amir al-Mu'minin would stand up. He would tell me, Ya Ali, sit down. Once again, he would say, Man li Amran wa ana admin lahu al-Jannah. Who's there for Amr? And I'll give him Jannah. Amir al-Mu'minin would stand up once again. Rasulullah would tell him, sit down, Ya Ali. You're my cousin. I don't want to make it look as if it's a family business. Once again, he would stand up. He would say, Man li Amran wa admin lahu al-Jannah. Amir al-Mu'minin would stand up. He would tell him, Ya Ali, go ahead. Take care of Amr. They say Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ahadith tells 18, 19 years old, picture this youth in your minds, brothers and sisters, and let him be the template to strive towards. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he would walk in front of Amr ibn Wood. Amr would see him, he would tell him, I don't want to fight you. He would tell him why. He would say, your father was my friend in Jahiliyyah. Listen to the reply of a man who has no fear in his heart. He would tell him, you don't want to kill me. That's not the discussion. I want to kill you. Look at Amir al-Mu'mineen. He was a man who would cry in the mihrab. He was afraid. He was the pinnacle, epitome, and climax of fear of Allah. But it was this fear that gave him strength. That's why when we compare between fear of Allah and fear of man, we can't mix them together. We cannot make Allah look as if he was this angry, vindictive, blood-shedding God. Because in essence, he's not. He's the man of Rahman. That's why when we recited Dua al-Jawshan on Laylatul Qadr, what do we say? We say, Ya man sabaqat rahmatuhu غضبه. We say, oh, the one who his anger was overwhelmed and overshadowed by his mercy. Look at the words of Dua Joshan. Ya man sabaqat rahmatuhu ghadaba. Meaning, that's why when you look in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He makes a reference to the fear that shaitan comes and instills within the hearts of his followers. Allah, what does He say? He says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, إِنَّمَا ذَلِكُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ يُخَوِّفُ أَوْلِيَاءَهُ. He says, shaitan comes and makes his followers fearful. In another verse, Allah comes and says, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتَانِ. For he who fears Allah, he receives 2 heavens. Now suddenly come and ask a question, is there a contradiction in the Quran? Because Allah comes and says, shaitan comes in, gives fear in the hearts of the mu'min. In another verse, Allah comes and says, if you fear me, I will give you Jannah. Is fear within our hearts of Allah, is it instilled by shaitan? No. Fear of shaitan, just like fear of man, is weakness. When I fear shaitan, I begin to fear everything. Yet when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes and says, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ جَنَّتَانِ. He who fears the station of his Lord, he receives 2 heavens. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is He saying? He's saying, when you fear me, it's much different than fear of shaitan. Shaitan is what makes you weak. You see many people in the world today, when they don't have fear of Allah, he appears to be strong, but in essence he's not strong, it's weakness. That's why when you look at, for example, on the 10th of Muharram, when Yazid ibn Muawiyah would bring with him 30,000 and Imam al-Hussein would bring with him 72, is this a sign of strength? 72 and 30,000. We must say, wow, these 30,000 are so strong, they defeated. No. If you have the audacity to bring 30,000 versus 72, this isn't a sign of strength, this is a sign of weakness. The fact that you have the ability to bring 70 or 30,000 versus 72, this is pure weakness. Or for example, in Egypt, when we see a few weeks ago where Hassan Shahat, that Shiite cleric, he was attacked by nearly 300 Egyptian people, and they would take this man, they would amputate his limbs, they would kill him, they would spread his limbs into places unknown. Is this a sign of strength? No. Only the weak will bring 300 versus 4 human beings. Only the weak. That's why they say when they were coming to Martin Luther King and they were trying to incarcerate him, they noticed that the papers would write that 10 people would come and try to stop Martin Luther King from retaliating. If you need 10 to fight 1 human being, sorry to break it to you, but that is not strength, that is pure weakness. Allah comes and says, a strong human being is like Amir al-Mu'mineen, who comes and he says, if the whole world was on one side and I was on another, I will still stay firm in my principles. He says, لا تستوحشوا طريق الحق لقلة سالكيه, Imam al-Mu'mineen says. He says, do not be scared of the path of truth for few followers. A lot of times we look at, for example, something which needs to be done and it's the right way to take, yet we see there's few people. For example, hijab, a classical example. The majority don't wear hijab. You want me to wear hijab? Allah comes and says, a true human being, a mu'min, he's not fearful of few followers of the path of truth. Rather, he takes it and he loves it and he'll stay on the path until his last moments. That's why even when you look at Badr and even the battles of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, they were always outnumbered. Badr 313 versus nearly 900. Outnumbered 1-3. Karbala 72 versus 30,000, for example. You look at, for example, other battles like Uhud, for example. We're always outnumbered. Majority of the battles in Islam were outnumbered. Yet Allah comes and says, this is a sign of true mu'min. His firmness and thabat. Thabat is something very essential. How many times do we recite in our dua? We say, Allahumma thabbit qalbi ala dinika ma ahaytani. We say, oh Allah, make firm my heart on your path because it brings me life. اللهم ثبت قلبي على دينك ما أحييتني ولا تزغ قلبي بعد إذ هديتني. And do not allow my heart to slip after you've guided me. وهب لي من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. And guide me through your mercy because you are the one who grants. You are Wahhab. Thabat. Thabat, brothers and sisters, was the notion that kept Ahlul Bayt on their path. For example, the Prophet of Islam, one day when Abu Talib would enter his house, he would tell him, Ya Rasulullah, Quraysh is willing to give you anything under the condition that you stop saying La ilaha illallah. Are you ready to do so? He would say, Ya Am, law wada'a ash-shamsa fi yamini wal qamara fi shimali ala an atruka hadha ad-din fa wallahi alladhi khalaqani lama taraktuh. Listen to the words of the Prophet of Islam. He would say, not only if they didn't give me the pleasures of this world, if they placed in my left hand the moon, and in my right hand the sun, so that I can stop saying La ilaha illallah, by the God who created me, never would I leave such a path. Look at the principle. Look at the thabat. For the majority, the minute the foundation is shook, the minute he feels a little bit of pain, he instantly turns to Allah. He says, Ya Allah, I'm your servant. I'm a Muslim. How could you do such a thing to me? Rather, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, the more pain he would feel, the more thankful he would be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He would say, Allahumma in kana hada yurdik, fazidni minhu. He would say, oh Allah, if this makes you happy, then give me more. My 9th month, my 9-month-old baby or 6-month-old baby is pierced with an arrow. That's not enough. Give me more. Zainab alayhi salam, her clothes are being burnt. That's not enough. Give me more. Qasim ibn al-Hasan, he's being killed despite his young age. That's not enough. Give me more. What is this? This is thabat. This is thabat that's induced within the heart of the human being when fear of Allah. Meaning, there's a chemical exchange. There's istihala. Fear of Allah is no longer fear. It becomes strength. It becomes security. It becomes safety. Becomes inner control. Becomes respect. Whereas fear of man, just like fear of shaitan, is that which induces fear, true fear within the heart of the human being. And that's why you'll see that when somebody may come and ask the question, if fear is the highest level of relationship a human being could have with Allah, where does love come into the picture? No, there's an evolution. You see, firstly, a human being has to have ma'rifah. There's about nearly 3 stages we can split it into. And firstly, he has to have ma'rifah of Allah, knowing Allah, understanding. أَوَّلُ الدِّينِ مَعْرِفَتُهُ, as Imam Amir al-Mu'min said. The first phase of knowledge is gnosis, to know Allah. مَنْ عَرِفَ نَفْسَهُ فَقَدْ عَرِفَ رَبَّهُ, and so on and so forth. Number 1, ma'rifah. Number 2 comes love. Love is the second phase. I love Allah because I know Him. You can only love a female or love a male after you get to know her. This idea of love at first sight, it's lust, as I mentioned previously. There's no love. Love only comes after you get to know a human being. Love of Allah, you begin to love Him. After love comes fear. Fear comes after love, it's not before it. Meaning, I begin to fear the act of disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have such strong relationships with God that not only do I not fear His punishment, I fear disobeying Him. You see, when you love somebody, you're scared of disobeying Him. You'll do whatever you can to satisfy Him. Allah comes and says, fearing me doesn't mean to be scared of me. It means to fear the act of disobeying me. And that's why you'll see that just as there are a number of types of fear of Allah and fear of shaitan, also with Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, there's 2 different kinds of fears. You'll see the enemies of Ahlul Bayt, they feared Ahlul Bayt for a number of reasons. Some of them feared Ahlul Bayt because of their sword. You'll see a number of munafiqeen and mushrikeen and the kuffar, we can say, for example, the Rum and Faris, they feared the Holy Prophet of Islam because of the sword of the Holy Prophet of Islam, because of the sword of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. Yet others didn't fear the sword. They feared the truth of Ahlul Bayt. Some feared Ahlul Bayt because of their sword, but the majority feared Ahlul Bayt because of the truth and adl that Ahlul Bayt had. Clear example is you'll find after Karbala, Yazid ibn Muawiyah, he would notice that Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam wanted to go and give his famous sermon, the sermon of Imam Zayn al-Abidin. He said, no, I'm not going to let him. People would come to Yazid, they would tell him why he's sick. Notice, he's a sick man, physically has no power. Look what he feared. He would say, no, if this man was to go up on the pulpit, he would begin to speak words which will expose my wickedness and evilness as a human being. He would say, هؤلاء أهل بيت قد زقوا العلم زقا. He would say, this is a family which has drunk knowledge and has quenched it completely through their thirst. زقوا العلم زقا. Even to the extent, when the adhan would go on, they would say, أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. Instantly, Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, he would say, شهد بها لحمي وجسمي وعظمي ومالي وشعري. He would say, everything within my existence has witnessed to the oneness of Allah. The adhan would continue. It would say, أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. They say that Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam, he would turn to Yazid. He would say, محمد هذا جدك أم جدي. He would say, this Muhammad, is he your grandfather or my grandfather? Look at Zainab alayhi salam, another classical example. She would expose the falsehood of the enemies of Ahlul Bayt, not through sword, not through physical strength, but through simply her tongue. That's when Zainab alayhi salam would stand in front of Yazid Muawiyah. She would say, يا يزيد كد كيدك وسع سعيك فما أيامك إلا بدد وما شملك إلا عدد وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون. She would say, oh Yazid, do what you want, gather your enemies, prepare your plans, scheme your agendas. For Allah, your days are numbered and your soldiers are counted, to the extent that people will begin to ask, is this Zainab or is this Ali ibn Abi Talib? Notice, through her verbal strength and through the truth that she held, she would expose the falsehood of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. That's why another excellent example that history gives us is of our fifth Imam Muhammad ibn Ali al-Baqir sallallahu alayhi wa. They say one day our fifth Imam, he would be invited by Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik. They say that Hisham, he would enter the castle of Imam Baqir would enter the castle of Hisham, and Hisham would tell him, oh Imam, come and play archery with us. He would say, دعني عن ذلك. It's not my expertise, and ask somebody else. I'm not interested in playing bow and arrows. He would say, no, I insist. Notice what he's trying to do. He's trying to humiliate the Imam. When you fear somebody, you try to humiliate him. Look how Imam flipped the equation upside down on his head. They say that he would come and he would say, please, I'm begging you, play some archery with us. He told him, no worries. He would take the bow and arrow. He would aim the first arrow. It would go into the heart of the target. He would take the second. He would tell him another one. He would become furious. Because he's expecting to humiliate the Imam. He's seeing he's doing the exact opposite. He's humiliating him. He would tell him, no, do it a second time. He would take it. It would go right next to the first arrow in the heart of the target. He would tell him a third one. He would take the third one. He would take it. It would go in the heart of the target. He would tell him, how do you know how to do bow and arrows? He would say, us Ahlul Bayt, we're not only perfect in knowledge, we're perfect in everything. A lot of times when we speak about Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, we tend to have this notion they were only knowledgeable in deen. No. Physically they were the best. Spiritually they were the best. Mentally, that's why when a mu'min tries to strive towards the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it shouldn't only be a gaining of knowledge. Socially, he should, a leader isn't somebody who only has knowledge, mental knowledge. No, socially he's top of the line. Physically he's the best. That's why a few days ago when I was reading the biography of Imam Ruhullah, they mention a very interesting line. They say ever since his young age, he would wrestle with kids, and he would always be victorious when he was 9-10 years old, to the extent that they say he was known as the champion of the area when it came to wrestling. Meaning it's not only knowledge, physically a mu'min is supposed to be the best. And this is where the true strength comes from, spiritual, no doubt, but physically he should be top of the line, socially, mentally, socially, from all aspects. Therefore you'll see Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik, he wanted to humiliate the Imam, yet the Imam humiliated him. Furthermore, you'll see when Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam was approached by the enemy of Allah, same exact situation, he would tell him, oh Imam, could you come play archery with us? He would instantly show him that us Ahlul Bayt, we're not only good at knowledge, we're good at everything. So you'll see that Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam were feared in two ways. Number one, because of their sword. Yet the majority feared Ahlul Bayt because of what? Because of their truth and because of their adl. They feared the haqq of Ali ibn Abi Talib. That's why when Allah comes and mentions in the Quran, He says, وَأَكْثَرُهُمْ لِلْحَقِّ كَارِهُونَ. He says, most of them hate the truth. Ali ibn Abi Talib, what is he known as? He's not simply known as Haydar. He's known as Aliyun ma'al haqq. وَالْحَقُّ مَعَ عَلِي يَدُورُ مَعَهُ حَيْثُ يَدُورُ. Ali is with truth, and truth is with Ali. That's why when the Holy Quran comes, it says, أَكْثَرُهُمْ لِلْحَقِّ كَارِهُونَ. Most of them hate truth. It's for that reason why people hate Amir al-Mu'mineen. Because wherever Ali is, there's truth. That's why they even tell us in Nabatiyya, in a place in Lebanon, on the 10th of Muharram, the Lebanese youth, they said, besides hitting our heads with the sword, let's go and hit the head of the enemy with the sword. So they would go to a certain area next to Lebanon, and they would begin to attack the enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When they captured them, they told them, you Lebanese boys, who's your leader? Where do you guys come from? They would say, our leader is Haydar. They would say, who's Haydar? They would reply, they would say, he's a man in Najaf. They would say, how old is Haydar? They would say, he's nearly 1400 years old. They would say, your leader is Haydar and he died a number of years ago. They said, no, Haydar is what gives us truth. Notice the minute they say Haydar, it instills fear. Wallah al-Azim. I remember there came a time in Iraq where you would have people who were killed simply because his name was Hassan, for example, simply because his name was Hussein. I mean, for goodness sake, his name is named after a human being who lived nearly 1400 years ago. Why do you fear it? He says, no, this name until today, it strikes fear into the heart of the enemy. That's why I even remember one day, we're bringing it on the discussion of if you mention the name, it brings fear, but also if you explain it logically, then the people will begin to love Ahlul Bayt just like you do. I remember one day I was going to Toronto, and we were passing the border, and you know, these guys, they ask you so many questions. They want to know who you are, who's your dad, where you came from, what you ate last night, your social security number. They want to know everything, the 9 yards. So I remember I was driving, and the man would come to me at the border. He would say, where are you going? I would tell him I'm going to a funeral, you know, because you can't tell him Hussein. It was Arba'een in Toronto. You can't tell him Hussein right away. He'll stop your interrogation for 45 hours. So I would tell him, I'm going to a funeral. He would say, whose funeral? I would tell him his name is Hussein. He would say, how long ago did he die? I would tell him 1400 years ago. He would say, don't you think you're kind of late for the funeral? I told him, no, Hussein is a man who died for justice. Hussein is a man who died for equality. I told him Hussein is a man who lived his entire life to keep the teachings of Jesus alive. He would say, really? I would say, yes. He would say, quickly go to the funeral before Hussein comes back to life. Go quickly, go and see Hussein. So you see, you explain it in a logical way, they begin to have a closer understanding. But the idea isn't this, it just came on the path and I wanted to mention it. The notion is that when you mention the name of Haydar, you mention the name of Hussein, it instills fear because these men were seen as the manifestation of fear. Hussein is seen as haqq, Ali ibn Abi Talib is seen as haqq. And the same reason why Shimr ibn the Joshan killed Imam al-Hussein on the 10th of Muharram is the same reason why Shia are being killed today. You'll see history repeats itself. When Allah says in the Quran, there are two kinds of Jahiliyyah. Jahiliyyah al-Ula, then you have other kinds of Jahiliyyah. You'll see history very beautifully repeats itself. Just like Zainab alayhi salam was oppressed. On the 10th of Muharram, you see also today the domes of Zainab are being attacked. History tends to repeat itself. You'll see something very interesting is that the same reason why Shimr ibn al-Joshan killed Imam al-Hussein, when he's laying on the 10th of Muharram, he would tell him, why do you kill me? He would tell him, Bughdan min abika Ali ibn Abi Talib, hatred for your father Ali. The same reason why Hussein was killed is the same reason why Shia are being killed today. We look at Bahrain, for example, Shia being killed on the daily. Very interesting, you'll see the media is silent about Bahrain. In Bahrain, you have blood is being spilled. There's no difference between Bahraini blood and, for example, Egyptian blood. It's still blood, but no, there's interest in the picture. Bahrainis die, you'll see nobody speaks about it. Why? Because these are Shia. You see, very interesting. Bahrain, 70% Shia. Yeah, you'll see, subhanAllah, the 70% are controlled by the rest of the 30. So you see in Bahrain, for example, in places such as Egypt, You'll see even there's a minority of Shia, they're oppressed, nobody speaks about it. In Pakistan, in Pakistan, Parachinar, Pakistan, you have Shia who are being killed on the daily. In Iraq, Shia being killed. You see, nobody says anything. I ask the question, why aren't they human beings? Why the injustice? Are you claiming to be a country of freedom? How does that work? No. This is haqq. We're not interested in haqq. Therefore, we're going to speak out against it. Now, our duty as Muslims, our duties as Shia, when we see this happening, and we see that the world, because of their fear for Islam, they're beginning to defame it, and they're quiet when it comes to haqq, what should we do? There's two kinds of people. One person, he would see it, and he would see, for example, that people are attacking Islam. He'll begin to get scared, he'll get intimidated for the overflow of attack on Islam. A second person, he comes in, he says, no, because the world is attacking Islam, because the world hates Islam, and they're depicting it as this religion of violence, now I'm not going to run away from it. I'm going to rise to the occasion. I'm going to gain knowledge, and I'm going to give it in a logical, rational way, not in an emotional way. One of the biggest problems you'll see is that we tend to give Islam in an emotional way, not in a rational way. You'll see, when I remember I was once in Iraq, in Najaf, Karbala, a few weeks ago, and I wanted to see how much people have knowledge of Ahlul Bayt. They're living next to Ahlul Bayt. He lives a few miles away from Ali ibn Abi Talib. I wanted to see how much knowledge does he have of Amir al-Mu'mineen. For those of you who've done ziyarah to Iraq, you'll see that there's a lot of beggars and a lot of orphans. The minute you leave your hotel, you have a plethora of orphans coming to you and begging to you for money, for fruits, whatever you have, they want to take it from you. So I remember one youth, he came to me in Najaf. We were walking towards Maytham al-Tammar, Kufa. He came to me and he told me, please give me money. I told him, no problem, I'll give you money, but give me the 12 imams. All I'm asking, 12 imams. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12. All 12 imams. He would look at me, he'd give me the first one, he'd tell me, Imam Ali. I told him, very good, alhamdulillah. Number 2, Imam Hassan. Alhamdulillah, we're doing good. Number 2, Imam Sistani. I told him, what did you say? He said, Imam Sistani. I told him, no problem, continue. He said, Ali Al-Akbar. I told him, really, Ali Al-Akbar. I told him, what else? He said, Abbas. I told him, no doubt. Well, what happened to the rest of the imams? You have your own, you have the Mu'tazila, for example, and they stop at the 7th imam. You have your own format, mashallah. You have Imam Sistani and your Imam in the imam. I told him, 12 imams. My niece, she lives nearly, she lives in Michigan. She's miles away from Karbala, and she knows the 12 imams. Could you give me the 12 imams? He said, Wallah ma a'raf, ahli ma 'allamuni. He would say, my parents didn't teach me. I don't know, problem. Another incident which also clarified this to me, that there is no true knowledge of Ahlul Bayt. It's emotional more than it is logical. I remember I entered an orphanage in Karbala, and when you see an orphan, you want to start a conversation with him. So I said maybe the best thing to do is to ask him about the imams, what are the 12 imams. I said that would be a beautiful start to a beautiful conversation. So he'd come to me and I'd tell him, Assalamu alaikum, how are you? He'd tell him, Alhamdulillah, I'm doing good. I told him, could you give me the 12 imams? He would look left, he would look right, he would say, Wallah, I'll be honest with you, I don't know. His mom comes and tries to help him. I asked him for the 12 imams. His mom would come, she would tell him Zainab. Tell him Zainab. I told him the 12 imams. Zainab alayhi salam, she was a great lady. Give me the 12 imams. I noticed, unfortunately, as I mentioned previously, there is financial poverty in Iraq, no doubt, but the true problem is that there's intellectual poverty. There's a lack of intellectual focus. Even I remember when I was walking towards the shrine of Imam Ali alayhi salam, I didn't know where it was, so a boy came to me, and he was trying to show me where it was, and he would look at me, he would tell me, where did you come from? I told him, from America. He would say, he started laughing. I told him, why are you laughing? He would say, we live next to the shrine of Imam Ali, and we're lucky if we visit it once a week. You're coming miles away from America to visit Imam Ali alayhi salam. So you'll see they have it, it's there, but there's no appreciation. SubhanAllah, I tell you, these kinds of majalis, when we come, we mention Ahlul Bayt, and we say the West is corrupted, and the West is this, the West is that. I tell you, Wallah al-Azim, when the hadith comes and says that the sun will rise from the West, we're beginning to see it today. They may have Ahlul Bayt physically there, but our hearts over here are connected to the shrines and to Al Muhammad more than their physical proximity to the shrines. Therefore, Allah comes and says, when you see that the world is attacking Ahlul Bayt, and the world has hate towards Al Muhammad, Don't run away from it. Rise to the occasion and understand it intellectually and rationally and begin to give it to the world today. Because when you look at it, the world today never has been hungrier for truth than they have been today. And it's the obligation of those who claim to have the truth to give it to the world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to teach the message of Ahlul Bayt in a logical way, not in an emotional way, in a way which will bring the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam closer and non-Muslims closer to the religion of Islam. Our enemy at the end of the day is not the Christian or the Jew. Our enemy is our own ignorance. Therefore they say, when you point a finger at somebody, don't forget there are 4 fingers pointing back at you. Let us try to be the templates, to be the standards before we begin to find faults in others. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma حقا فاتبعا والباطل باطلا فاجتنبا اللهم ثبت قلبي على دينك ما أحييتني ولا تزغ قلبي بعد إذ هديتني وهب لي من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب والاستجابة الدعاء ودفع البلاء. We recite أما يجيب 3 times with the loudest of your voices. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف سوء المعتام. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه يا كاشف السوء اكشف السوء عنا يا الله. اللهم شافي كل مريض بحق مريضي كربلاء زين العابدين. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين واخذل الكفر والمنافقين. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج واجعلنا من أنصاره وأعوانه والمستشهدين بين يديه. And to answer our du'as and to hasten the appearance of our awaited Imam. We recite Surah Al-Fatiha with a salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.